The wrench slipped from my oil-stained fingers at exactly 11:47 p.m., clattering against the concrete floor of my garage like a warning. I was underneath my battered Ford pickup, trying to coax life back into its failing transmission, when I heard Sarah's voice drifting through the kitchen window above. "I can't wait to see you this weekend, baby," she whispered into her phone, her voice honey-sweet in a way it hadn't been for me in years. "He'll never suspect a thing. He's too busy playing with his broken toys." My name is Jack Morrison, and I've spent the last 15 years of my life fixing things that other people break. Houses, marriages, trucks that should have been scrapped a decade ago. I'm the guy who makes it all work again. What I didn't realize until that moment was that some things are broken beyond repair, and sometimes the person holding the hammer is the one you sleep next to every night. I rolled out from under the truck, my back screaming in protest. Through the grimy garage window, I could see Sarah pacing the kitchen in her silk pajamas, the expensive ones she'd bought for our anniversary last month. The ones she claimed were just for special occasions. "Mom's finally getting rid of Dad's burden," came another voice from inside. My 17-year-old daughter Emma, loud enough to make sure I heard every word. "She deserves so much better than some guy who can't even afford to fix his own truck." I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped closer to the window. Sarah was still whispering sweet nothings to whoever was on the other end of that call, mentioning plans for a romantic weekend getaway. Funny thing was, she'd told me she was going to a real estate conference in Boston. The cold October air bit through my flannel shirt as I stood there, watching my wife of 18 years plan her betrayal in my own kitchen. My reflection stared back at me from the garage window, 43 years old, graying at the temples, hands permanently stained from a lifetime of honest work. I looked like exactly what I was, a small-town contractor who'd sacrificed everything for a family that saw him as an embarrassment. Sarah ended her call and disappeared upstairs. Emma followed, but not before making a show of slamming her bedroom door hard enough to rattle the windows. The house fell silent, except for the October wind whistling through the gaps in the siding, gaps I kept meaning to fix but never seemed to find the time for. I picked up the wrench and got back under the truck. Sometimes fixing things is all you can do, even when you know they're broken beyond repair. But as I lay there in the dark, listening to my wife's footsteps creaking across the bedroom floor above, I started thinking that maybe it was time to stop fixing and start breaking. After all, I'd learned from the best. 3 days later, I found the burner phone. I wasn't snooping, at least that's what I told myself as I sorted through the laundry. Sarah had abandoned in the basement. Buried in the pocket of her designer jeans was a cheap flip phone I'd never seen before. The kind you buy with cash at a gas station when you don't want your husband finding certain numbers on the family phone bill. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages. Dozens of them, going back months. The contact was saved as B, but the messages made it clear who B really was. Brad Hutchinson, Sarah's business partner at Prestige Realty. The same Brad, who'd been coming around for dinner lately, always with some excuse about discussing listings or planning marketing strategies. The messages started innocent enough, work stuff mixed with casual flirtation, but they got progressively more explicit as the months went on. Hotel room numbers, times when I'd be out on job sites, detailed descriptions of what they planned to do to each other while I was crawling around in someone else's crawl space, trying to make enough money to keep our family afloat. The most recent message was from yesterday. "Can't wait for our weekend in the mountains. Told Jack it's a work conference. He's so pathetic he actually believed me. See you at the Riverside Motel, room 237. I sat on the basement steps, holding that phone like it was a live grenade. 18 years of marriage. 18 years of Sarah complaining that I didn't make enough money, didn't dress well enough, did not fit in with her real estate friends. 18 years of me working 60-hour weeks to pay for Emma's private school, Sarah's BMW, the mortgage on a house that was supposed to be our dream but felt more like a prison. And all that time, she'd been planning her escape with a guy who wore $1,000 suits and drove a Porsche SUV bought with commissions from selling houses to people like me. People dumb enough to believe in things like loyalty and commitment. The basement door creaked open above me. Sarah's heels clicked on the wooden steps. "Jack? What are you doing down there?" I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket and grabbed a wrench from my toolbox. "Just checking the water heater, making sure we don't freeze this winter." She appeared at the bottom of the stairs, already dressed for work in a sharp black suit that probably cost more than I made in a week. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like success personified, everything a small-town real estate broker should be. "Well, hurry up. I'm leaving for Boston in an hour and I need you to pick up Emma from school today. She's staying late for drama club." "Boston," I repeated, testing the word. "Right. Your conference." "The New England Realty Summit," she said smoothly, not even a flicker of guilt in her green eyes. 3 days of seminars and networking. Boring stuff, but it's good for business. I nodded and turned back to the water heater, pretending to tighten a fitting that didn't need tightening. "Drive safe. Wouldn't want you to have car trouble in the mountains." She paused on the stairs. "Mountains? Jack, Boston isn't in the mountains." "Right," I said, not looking at her. "My mistake. Have fun at your conference." After she left, I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time, staring at that burner phone. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, to call her out on her lies and demand an explanation. But another part of me, the part that had learned hard lessons about timing and patience from 25 years of construction work, told me to wait. You don't tear down a building without first understanding how it's constructed. You study the blueprints, identify the load-bearing walls, figure out which supports you can remove without bringing the whole thing down on your head. Sarah thought she was so clever, planning her weekend getaway while I played the role of the clueless husband. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated the guy who'd spent his entire adult life taking things apart and putting them back together. I started the truck and drove toward Main Street, toward Mickey's boxing gym where my old friend Mike Torino held court every afternoon. If I was going to wage war, I needed advice from someone who understood the art of taking hits and hitting back. The burner phone felt heavy in my pocket, loaded with enough ammunition to destroy my marriage, my family, and probably my sanity. But as I pulled into Mickey's parking lot, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't devastated. I was angry, and anger, properly channeled, could be a very useful tool. Mickey's boxing gym occupied the bottom floor of a brick building that had seen better decades. The windows were fogged with condensation, and the rhythmic thud of gloves hitting heavy bags provided a steady heartbeat to the afternoon. I found Mike Torino in his usual spot behind the front counter, reading a newspaper and nursing a cup of coffee that had probably been brewing since morning. Mike and I went back to high school, back when this town still had a future, and dreams didn't feel like luxuries we couldn't afford. He'd taken over the gym from his father 15 years ago and somehow managed to keep it running, despite the economic decline that had shuttered half the businesses on Main Street. "Jack Morrison," he said without looking up from his paper. "You look like someone just told you your dog ran away." "Worse," I said, settling onto the stool across from him. "Found out my wife's been cheating." That got his attention. Mike folded his newspaper and studied my face with the careful attention he usually reserved for evaluating fighters. He was a big man, 6'2", with hands like anvils and a face that had absorbed its share of punishment during his own boxing days. You sure about this? I pulled out the burner phone and slid it across the counter. Mike scrolled through a few messages, his expression darkening with each one. Brad Hutchinson, he said finally. That pretty boy from the real estate office. I should have known. You know him? Know of him. He comes into Murphy's bar sometimes, flashing money around and hitting on anything in a skirt. Always figured he was the type who'd steal another man's wife if he thought he could get away with it. Mike handed the phone back and leaned against the counter. Behind us, a young fighter was working the speed bag with mechanical precision, the rapid-fire rhythm echoing off the concrete walls. So what's your play? Mike asked. I don't know yet. Part of me wants to drive to that motel and kick his ass. And the other part? The other part knows that would just make me look like the bad guy. Sarah's already got Emma convinced I'm some kind of loser who's holding the family back. If I go caveman on her boyfriend, I'll just prove her point. Mike nodded approvingly. Smart. Anger's like a punch. It's only effective if you control it and aim it right. You go off half-cocked, you'll miss your target and leave yourself wide open for a counterattack. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and offered me one. I declined. My nerves were already wound tight enough. Here's what I learned in 20 years of fighting, Mike continued. The guy who throws the first punch usually loses. The guy who throws the last punch wins. Your wife and her boyfriend think they've got you beat before the fight even starts. They think you're too weak, too stupid, or too nice to fight back. Maybe they're right. Bullshit. You've been fighting your whole life, Jack. Fighting to build a business. Fighting to provide for your family. Fighting to keep this marriage together, even when it was clear your wife had already checked out. The only difference now is that you're finally fighting for yourself. A crash of weights hitting the floor punctuated his words. One of the younger fighters had dropped his dumbbells and was staring at his phone, probably reading a text from some girl who was about to break his heart. The cycle never ended. So what do I do? Mike smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. You do what any good fighter does when his opponent shows their weakness. You exploit it. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small digital camera, the kind private investigators used for surveillance work. My brother-in-law left this here last month. He's a PI down in Hartford, does a lot of divorce work, says documentation is everything in these cases. I stared at the camera. Taking it would mean crossing a line, admitting that my marriage was over and declaring war on the woman I'd once promised to love and honor. But as I thought about those text messages, about Sarah's casual cruelty and Emma's contempt, I realized that war had already been declared. I'd just been too naive to notice. They're at the Riverside Motel, I said, taking the camera. Room 237. Then I'd say it's time for some reconnaissance. I left Mickey's gym with a plan forming in my mind. Sarah and Brad thought they were so clever, conducting their affair right under my nose while treating me like I was too stupid to notice. They wanted to play games with my life, my family, my self-respect. Fine. But they were about to learn that some games have consequences, and I'd been playing by their rules long enough. It was time to make some rules of my own. The Riverside Motel squatted on Route 9 like a guilty secret, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions about wedding rings. I parked my truck behind a cluster of pine trees across the street, the digital camera heavy in my hands as I watched Brad's silver Porsche Cayenne pull into the parking lot. Sarah's BMW arrived 10 minutes later. She'd changed out of her business suit into jeans and a sweater, casual clothes she never wore around me anymore, the kind of outfit that said she was relaxed, happy, free from the burden of pretending to be a devoted wife. I watched them meet in the parking lot, watched Brad pull her into his arms and kiss her like they were teenagers instead of two people destroying a family. Sarah threw back her head and laughed at something he whispered in her ear, and the sound carried across the empty lot like a slap. Through the camera's zoom lens, I documented everything. Brad's license plate, the time stamps, their faces as they walked hand in hand toward room 237. I felt like a private investigator in some noir movie, except the betrayal was real, and the woman breaking my heart was the mother of my child. They stayed in that room for 3 hours. 3 hours while I sat in my truck, eating gas station sandwiches and taking pictures of every car that came and went. 3 hours while Sarah sent me text messages about boring conference seminars and networking dinners. When they finally emerged, both looking satisfied and disheveled, I was ready. I'd already written the note, already planned my next move. As soon as their cars disappeared down Route 9, I walked across the parking lot. Brad's Porsche was parked in the spot closest to room 237, gleaming silver paint reflecting the afternoon sun. I took a few more pictures, then pulled out my keys and carved a message into the driver's side door. Cheater. It felt good, that scraping sound of metal on metal. Therapeutic. But I wasn't done. I let the air out of his front tire, not slashing it, just deflating it enough to be a major inconvenience. Then I slipped my note under his windshield wiper. Drive safe, Brad. I'd hate for you to get a flat on your way home from being with my wife. Jack Morrison. I was walking back to my truck when I heard the camera click behind me. Well, Jack Morrison, playing detective. I turned to find Dolores Krensky, our 70-year-old neighbor who'd made gossip her full-time occupation since retiring from the post office. She was holding up her smartphone, a satisfied smirk on her wrinkled face. Hello, Dolores. Caught you red-handed, didn't I? Vandalizing that nice young man's car. Sarah's going to be so disappointed when she finds out what her husband's been up to. I looked at her for a long moment. This bitter old woman who'd spent decades stirring up trouble in other people's lives. She thought she had me cornered, thought she could use this moment to cause maximum damage to my already crumbling marriage. You're right, Dolores, I said finally. Sarah is going to be disappointed, but probably not for the reasons you think. I got in my truck and drove home, leaving her standing in the motel parking lot with her phone and her smug expression. Let her send Sarah the photo. Let her think she was getting revenge for some imagined slight from years past. She was about to become an unwitting accomplice in my plan, and she didn't even know it. When I got home, Emma was in the kitchen, making herself a sandwich and scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in. Where's your mother? Conference, remember? God, Dad, do you ever listen to anything she says? I opened a beer and leaned against the counter, studying my daughter. She had Sarah's blonde hair and green eyes, but her attitude was all her own, entitled, dismissive, convinced that the world owed her something just for existing. Emma, do you remember when you were little and I used to take you fishing at Miller's Pond? She glanced up from her phone, annoyed at the interruption. I guess. Why? You caught your first base that summer you turned 8. You were so proud. You made me take pictures and everything. You said you wanted to be a professional fisherman when you grew up. That's stupid. I was 8. Yeah, you were 8. And you still thought your old dad was pretty cool back then. Emma's expression softened slightly, just for a moment. Dad, are you okay? You're acting weird. Before I could answer, Sarah's BMW pulled into the driveway. I checked my watch. 6:30 p.m., right on schedule. She'd probably driven straight here from the motel, maybe stopping to grab some conference materials to maintain her cover story. There's Mom, Emma said, returning to her phone. Sarah walked in carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who'd just spent the day in boring business meetings instead of a cheap motel room. She kissed Emma on the forehead, then turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How was your day, honey?" "Productive," I said. Fixed the Hendersons' kitchen sink, started framing the Johnsons' addition. You know, the usual. "That's nice." She was already moving toward the stairs, eager to shower off the evidence of her afternoon activities. "I'm exhausted. These conferences are so draining." "I bet they are." She paused at the bottom of the stairs, studying my face. "Jack, is everything all right? You seem different." "Just tired, I guess. It's been a long day." Sarah nodded and headed upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard the shower running. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it had to be. The message contained a photo of me standing next to Brad's Porsche, my keys in my hand, and a guilty expression on my face. Below the image was a simple message. "Thought you should know what your husband was up to today. A concerned neighbor." I deleted the message and finished my beer. Sarah thought she was so smart, playing her games and covering her tracks, but she was about to learn that some games have rules, and I'd just change them. The real fun was about to begin. Sarah confronted me the next morning while I was loading my truck for work. She stood in the driveway wearing her bathrobe and holding her phone, Dolores's incriminating photo displayed on the screen like evidence in a murder trial. "Care to explain this, Jack?" I glanced at the photo, then went back to loading my tools. "Looks like someone caught me vandalizing a car. Pretty clear evidence, I'd say." "This isn't funny. That's Brad's Porsche. You keyed his car and slashed his tire." "Actually, I just let the air out. Slashing would have been property damage. This was more like a practical joke." Sarah stepped closer, her face flushed with anger. "A practical joke? Jack, this is insane behavior. Brad's my business partner. What am I supposed to tell him?" I straightened up and looked at her directly for the first time in weeks. Really looked at her, taking in the perfectly styled hair, the expensive skincare routine, the manicured nails that had never done an honest day's work. She was beautiful, I had to admit. Beautiful and cold, and utterly convinced of her own superiority. "You could tell him the truth," I said. "That your husband found out about your little weekend getaway and decided to leave a calling card." The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Room 237 at the Riverside Motel. 3 hours yesterday afternoon, while you were supposed to be driving to Boston. Should I go on, or do you want to keep pretending I'm stupid?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered those text messages, the casual cruelty in her voice when she talked about me to her lover. "Jack, I can explain." "No need. It's all pretty clear. You're seeing your business partner. You've been lying to me for months. And you've turned our daughter against me in the process. Did I miss anything?" Emma appeared at the front door, drawn by the raised voices. She took in the scene. Her mother clutching her phone, her father loading his truck with grim determination, and her face lit up with the excitement of impending drama. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping onto the porch. "Your father has lost his, mind," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "He's been following me, vandalizing cars, making wild accusations." "Wild accusations?" I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. "Emma, your mother's been having an affair with Brad Hutchinson for months. The weekend conference in Boston? She spent it in a motel room with her boyfriend." Emma's eyes went wide. She looked from me to Sarah, processing this information with the speed of someone who'd grown up in the social media age. "Mom? Is that true?" Sarah's face crumpled. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Your father and I, We've been having problems for a long time. Sometimes adults make mistakes when they're unhappy." "Mistakes," I repeated. "That's what we're calling it?" "Don't you dare judge me, Jack Morrison," Sarah snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Do you have any idea what it's like being married to someone with no ambition, no drive, no interest in bettering himself? I've been carrying this family financially and socially for years while you play in the dirt with your little construction projects." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to wound. But instead of devastating me, they had the opposite effect. They freed me. For the first time in years, I was seeing Sarah clearly, not as the woman I'd fallen in love with, but as the person she'd become. "You're right," I said calmly. "I am just a contractor. I fix things for a living. But here's what I've learned in 25 years of construction work. When something's rotten, you don't try to patch it up. You tear it down and start over." I slammed the tailgate of my truck and climbed into the driver's seat. Sarah was still standing in the driveway, clutching her phone and looking like her world had just collapsed. Emma was staring at both of us with an expression I couldn't read. "Where are you going?" Sarah called out. "To work," I said, starting the engine. "Some of us still have jobs to do." I drove away without looking back, leaving my wife and daughter to deal with the wreckage of their perfect little fantasy. The radio was playing some country song about heartbreak and revenge, and for the first time in months, I found myself smiling. The war was officially declared. Now it was time to start winning it. By lunchtime, Emma had turned my marriage into a TikTok sensation. I discovered this when Mike showed me his phone at the gym, his expression somewhere between amused and horrified. The video had already gotten 50,000 views and was climbing fast. "Dad's having a complete meltdown," Emma announced to her phone camera, her face perfectly lit and her expression crafted for maximum dramatic impact. "Like, he's been stalking Mom, vandalizing cars, making these insane accusations about her having an affair. It's honestly scary how delusional he's gotten." The video cut to a shot of our house, then to a photo of me looking disheveled and angry, probably taken during this morning's confrontation. Emma's voice continued over the images. "Mom's been working so hard to build her real estate business, and Dad just can't handle having a successful wife. He's been trying to sabotage her for months, spreading rumors about her and her business partner. It's giving major toxic masculinity vibes, and I'm honestly worried about Mom's safety." The comments were brutal. Hundreds of strangers calling me everything from controlling to abusive, based on a 17-year-old's carefully edited version of events. Emma had positioned herself as the brave daughter protecting her innocent mother from her unstable father, and the internet had eaten it up. "Jesus, Jack," Mike said, scrolling through the comments. "This kid's got a real talent for character assassination." I handed the phone back, feeling like I'd been sucker punched. She doesn't know the whole story. Doesn't matter. In the court of public opinion, the first person to tell their side of the story usually wins. And your daughter just painted you as a psycho stalker to half the internet. I spent the rest of the afternoon working on the Johnson's edition, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of measuring, cutting, and nailing. But every few minutes, my phone would buzz with a notification. Friends and acquaintances who'd seen Emma's video offering everything from concern to barely concealed judgment. By the time I got home that evening, the story had spread beyond social media. Mrs. Patterson from down the street was watering her flowers with obvious intent to eavesdrop. The mailman lingered longer than necessary at our mailbox. Even the pizza delivery guy gave me a suspicious look when I answered the door. Sarah was in the living room when I walked in, her laptop open and her phone buzzing constantly. She looked up at me with an expression of smug satisfaction. "Quite a day on the internet," she said. "Emma's video has really struck a chord with people." I can imagine. The comments are particularly interesting. Lots of women sharing their own stories about controlling husbands who couldn't handle their success. It's really opened up an important conversation about domestic emotional abuse. I stared at her. This woman I'd shared a bed with for 18 years, who was now casually destroying my reputation as part of her exit strategy. She'd turned our marriage into a feminist morality tale, with herself as the victim and me as the villain. Where's Emma? Upstairs, probably making another video. She's gotten over 100,000 followers today. Some talent agency already reached out about representation. How nice for her. Sarah closed her laptop and stood up, smoothing her skirt with practiced precision. Jack, I want you to move out. Tonight. This is my house too. Actually, it's not. I've been making the mortgage payments for the last 3 years while your little construction business barely broke even. My lawyer says I have grounds for an emergency restraining order based on your recent behavior and Emma's testimony. She was enjoying this, I realized. The power play, the public humiliation, the complete dismantling of everything I'd worked for. This wasn't just about Brad Hutchinson or her desire for a different life. This was about revenge for years of perceived slights and disappointments. Your lawyer, I repeated. I retained counsel this afternoon. Given your escalating behavior and the threats you made against Brad, we felt it was necessary to protect ourselves legally. What threats? Sarah smiled and pulled out her phone, scrolling to a text message. The note you left on Brad's car yesterday. I'd hate for you to get a flat on your way home from being with my wife. That could be seen as a threat of physical harm. I had to admire the strategy. She'd taken my moment of petty revenge and weaponized it, turning my justified anger into evidence of dangerous instability. Combined with Emma's viral video, she'd created a narrative that cast her as the innocent victim and me as the unhinged abuser. You've thought this through. I've had to. You've left me no choice, Jack. Your behavior has become erratic and threatening. I'm afraid of what you might do next. Are you? Are you really afraid of me, Sarah? For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw a flash of the old Sarah, the woman who'd once laughed at my jokes and shared my dreams. But then the expression hardened again, and she was back to playing her role. I want you out of this house tonight. You can stay at Mike's gym or find a motel. I don't care. But I won't have you terrorizing this family anymore. I looked around the living room. At the furniture we'd picked out together, the family photos that would soon be evidence in a custody hearing, the life we'd built that was now being systematically demolished. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her phone already recording. This is so toxic, she said to her camera, making sure to capture my face in the background. Dad's refusing to leave even though Mom asked him to. The gaslighting is real, you guys. I walked upstairs to pack a bag, leaving my wife and daughter to document my defeat for their respective audiences. As I threw clothes into a duffel bag, I could hear Emma's voice drifting up from the living room. Update, Dad's finally packing. Mom's been so brave through all of this. I'm just glad she's finally standing up for herself. 20 minutes later. I was loading my truck in the driveway while half the neighborhood watched from behind their curtains. Sarah stood on the porch like a queen surveying her conquered territory, and Emma live-streamed the whole thing for her growing army of followers. As I drove away from the house I'd spent 15 years paying for, I realized that Sarah had outplayed me completely. She'd turned my justified anger into evidence of abuse, my daughter into a weapon, and the entire internet into her personal army. But she'd also made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated how much damage a man could do when he had nothing left to lose. The war was far from over. It was just moving to a new battlefield. I bought the lakeside cabin with cash I'd been hiding from Sarah for 2 years. It wasn't much to look at, a dilapidated fishing shack on Miller's Pond, the same place where I'd taught Emma to cast a line back when she still thought I could do no wrong. The previous owner had passed away the winter before, and his kids were eager to sell the property for whatever they could get. Mike helped me load my tools and the few possessions I'd managed to salvage from my former life. The cabin needed work: new roof, updated electrical, windows that actually kept the wind out. But it had something my marriage had lacked for years: potential. Not exactly the Ritz, Mike observed, setting down a box of my clothes in what would generously be called the living room. It'll do. Besides, I've got time to fix it up now that I'm not pretending to be a happy husband. Mike cracked open a beer and handed me one. We sat on the rickety porch, looking out over the pond as the sun set behind the pine trees. It was peaceful in a way I'd almost forgotten existed. "So, what's your next move?" he asked. I pulled out my phone and showed him the latest updates from Emma's social media empire. Her follower count had exploded to over 200,000, and she was already selling merchandise with slogans like "Toxic Dad Survivor" and "Supporting Strong Moms." Sarah had been featured in 3 local news interviews about domestic emotional abuse, positioning herself as an advocate for women trapped in controlling relationships. "They're making money off this," I said. "Emma's got sponsorship deals. Sarah's getting referrals from women who see her as some kind of feminist hero. They've turned destroying my life into a cottage industry. That's cold. That's business. Sarah always was good at marketing." I scrolled to the latest video, posted just an hour ago. Emma was giving her followers a tour of the house, pointing out evidence of my controlling behavior: the home security system I'd installed after a break-in 2 years ago, the joint bank account I'd managed because Sarah was always too busy, the family computer I'd set up with parental controls to keep Emma from accessing inappropriate content. "Look at this," Emma said to her camera, opening the closet in what used to be my home office. Dad kept all of Mom's important papers locked up in here: her passport, birth certificate, even her diploma. Classic abuser behavior, controlling access to documents so she couldn't leave. What Emma didn't mention was that I'd put those documents in a fireproof safe after our basement flooded 3 years ago, destroying thousands of dollars worth of family records. But context didn't matter in the world of viral content. The narrative was more important than the truth. "They're good at this," Mike admitted. "Evil, but good." "Yeah, they are, but they've made one mistake." "What's that?" I smiled and took a long pull from my beer. "They think I'm beaten. They think I'm going to slink away to my little cabin and disappear from their lives forever. They've written me off as a broken man who's too weak and too stupid to fight back. Aren't you? 2 months ago, maybe. But that was before I realized that I've been playing defense for 18 years. Time to try some offense. Over the next week, I threw myself into renovating the cabin with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I ripped out rotted floorboards and replaced them with solid oak. I rewired the electrical system and installed new fixtures throughout. I patched holes, painted walls, and turned a rundown fishing shack into something approaching livable. The physical work felt good, therapeutic in a way that sitting in lawyers' offices and reading divorce papers never could. Every nail I drove, every board I cut, every improvement I made was proof that I could still build something worthwhile, even if I couldn't save my marriage. But I wasn't just renovating the cabin, I was planning. Sarah had used social media to destroy my reputation, so I started documenting everything. Every lie Emma told in her videos, every exaggeration Sarah made in her interviews, every inconsistency in their carefully crafted narrative. I created fake accounts and followed their content, screenshot everything, built a comprehensive record of their campaign against me. I also started digging into Brad Hutchinson's background. It turns out that Sarah's perfect boyfriend had some secrets of his own. A bankruptcy filing from 5 years ago, a pattern of jumping from job to job, and most interesting of all, a previous relationship that had ended with a restraining order filed by his ex-girlfriend. The ex-girlfriend, Jennifer Walsh, was surprisingly willing to talk when I called her. She'd moved to Vermont after her relationship with Brad ended, but she remembered him clearly. "He's charming at first," she told me over the phone. "Sweeps you off your feet, makes you feel like the most important person in the world. But underneath all that charm, he's a user. He moved in with me, ran up my credit cards, and when I confronted him about it, he got violent." Violent how? Never hit me, but he'd throw things, punch walls, scream until the neighbors called the cops. The restraining order was more about protecting my property than my person, if you know what I mean. I knew exactly what she meant. Brad was a con artist who targeted successful women, used them for financial gain, and moved on when they got wise to his game. Sarah thought she'd found her Prince Charming, but she'd actually picked up a professional parasite. The question was, how long would it take her to figure that out? I didn't have to wait long for an answer. Sarah's first call came on a Tuesday morning, right in the middle of me installing new kitchen cabinets in the cabin. I was elbow deep in wood, the smell of fresh-cut pine filling the air, when my phone rang. Her voice on the other end was strained, a stark contrast to the confident tone she'd maintained throughout our separation. "Jack, we need to talk." "About what?" I set down my drill, frustrated with the interruption. "Your lawyer said all communication should go through legal channels. This isn't about the divorce, it's about something else." I frowned and stepped out onto the porch, squinting at the sunlight glinting off the surface of the pond. A family of ducks paddled around, teaching their ducklings how to dive for food. Simple, honest, natural, everything my marriage hadn't been. "I'm listening," I said, my voice calm, though inside I could feel the tension rising. There have been some financial irregularities at the office. Money missing from client escrow accounts, forged signatures on contracts. The state licensing board is launching an investigation." I let out a breath, feeling a small, almost involuntary smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "That's unfortunate. Jack, if he loses his license, it could destroy the whole agency. I could lose everything I've worked for. And you're telling me this because—" I let the question hang, my patience thinning. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that felt like it stretched on forever. When Sarah finally spoke again, her voice was smaller, quieter, almost fragile, a stark contrast to the woman I'd known for so long. "Because I think I made a mistake." I leaned back against the railing, looking out at the pond as the ducks swam lazily past, unaware of the storm brewing in my conversation. "Which mistake would that be? Cheating on your husband, destroying your family, or trusting a con artist with your business?" "All of it," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of her regret. "God, Jack, what have I done?" For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then, memories of Emma's tear-filled eyes flashed in my mind, how Sarah had painted me as the abusive monster in the interviews. The carefully orchestrated campaign she'd waged to destroy my reputation, to turn friends and family against me. I pushed the pity aside. "You made your choice, Sarah," I said, my tone hardening. "Now you get to live with the consequences." "But what if I was wrong? What if I can fix this?" Her voice cracked, a faint edge of desperation slipping through her words. I stayed silent for a moment, letting the weight of her question sink in. Could she fix this? Could she undo the damage? Part of me wanted to believe she could, that the woman I once loved still existed somewhere beneath the mistakes. But another part of me knew better. "Sarah," I said finally, my voice measured, "you had a chance to fix things a long time ago. You had chances, but you chose a different path. Now you have to deal with what you've done." I didn't know what I was doing," she said, almost pleading. "I thought I was doing the right thing, Jack. I was trying to protect what we had. Everything was falling apart and I didn't know how to stop it. I thought if I could just make it through, everything would be okay. But now, it's all crashing down, and I don't know what to do." Her words hung in the air, a jumble of confusion and regret. I knew what it felt like to be lost, to think you were doing the right thing, only to realize too late that it was all wrong. But I also knew that some things couldn't be fixed. Some mistakes were too big, too deep to ever repair. "I'm not your savior, Sarah," I said, my voice flat. "I'm not here to fix your mess. You created it, and now you have to clean it up. But you can't expect me to help you. Not after everything you've done." "I know," she said quietly, the weight of my words settling between us like a heavy fog. "I know. I didn't know who else to turn to." "You've turned to the wrong person," I said, my words cold but final. "The only one who can fix this is you. But that means facing the truth and dealing with the fallout, not hiding behind excuses and regrets." There was a long silence after that, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something. Was it relief? Maybe. Maybe it was the realization that I'd finally let go of the hope that things could go back to the way they were. That Sarah could be the woman she once was. That I could forgive her and forget the pain. But it wasn't that simple, and I wasn't ready to pretend it was. "I hope you figure it out, Sarah," I said, my voice low. "But don't expect me to be part of it, not anymore." And with that, I ended the call, feeling the weight of the conversation settle on me like a stone. As I stood there, staring out at the pond, the ducks moving in slow circles, I realized that maybe the hardest part wasn't dealing with Sarah's mistakes. It was accepting that I had to let go of everything that had tied me to her. Some things can't be fixed. You taught me that. I hung up and went back to work on the cabinets, but I couldn't concentrate. Sarah's call had been unexpected, a crack in the confident facade she'd maintained for months. If Brad was really stealing from the business, it was only a matter of time before the whole house of cards came tumbling down. That evening, I drove into town to grab dinner at Murphy's bar. The place was half empty, just a few regulars nursing beers and watching a baseball game on the ancient TV above the bar. I was halfway through a burger when Emma walked in. She looked different than she had in her recent videos, smaller somehow, less sure of herself. Her phone wasn't in her hand for once, and she wasn't performing for an invisible audience. She spotted me in the corner booth and hesitated, as if she might turn around and leave. Instead, she walked over and slid into the seat across from me. "Hi, Dad." "Emma, shouldn't you be making a TikTok about how traumatizing it is to see your abusive father in public?" She flinched at the sarcasm in my voice. "I probably deserved that." "Probably?" Emma stared at her hands, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to help me fix broken toys in the garage. "Mom's been really stressed lately. There's some problem at work, and Brad's been different." "Different how?" "Angry. He yells at Mom when he thinks I'm not listening. And yesterday I saw him going through her purse when she was in the shower." I took a bite of my burger, chewing slowly while I processed this information. "What do you want me to say, Emma? That I'm sorry your mother's boyfriend turned out to be exactly what I said he was. I want... She paused, struggling with words. I want to know if you can ever forgive me. The question caught me off guard. For months, Emma had been my most vocal critic, documenting my failures and broadcasting my flaws to the world. Her videos had cost me friends, clients, and what remained of my reputation in this town. She'd turned my pain into content and my humiliation into profit. But looking at her now, I saw something I'd missed in all those carefully edited videos. She was 17 years old and scared. She'd been caught in the middle of her parents' war and had chosen the side that seemed strongest, most likely to provide security and stability. It wasn't admirable, but it was understandable. I don't know, I said honestly. I want to, but I don't know if I can. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Dad. I thought, Mom said you were trying to control us, that you were holding her back from being successful. I thought I was protecting her. And now? Now I think maybe I was wrong about everything. Emma wiped her eyes with a napkin and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, respect mixed with hope and a desperate desire for forgiveness. Mom wants to meet with you. Tomorrow night, at the house. She says she has something important to tell you. I'll bet she does. Will you come? Please? I finished my burger and stood up, dropping a 20 on the table. Emma looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, waiting for an answer that would determine whether her family had any chance of surviving the wreckage she and her mother had created. I'll think about it, I said finally. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. For now, it would have to be enough. As I drove back to the cabin, I realized that Sarah and Emma's perfect plan was falling apart. Brad's criminal behavior was about to be exposed. Emma was having second thoughts about her role as the family destroyer, and Sarah was finally beginning to understand the true cost of her choices. The question was, what did I want to do about it? I arrived at my former house at exactly 8 o'clock the next evening, parking in the driveway I'd shoveled every winter for 15 years. Sarah answered the door wearing jeans and a sweater, the same casual outfit she'd worn to meet Brad at the motel, but now it looked different, desperate instead of carefree. Thank you for coming, she said, stepping aside to let me in. The living room looked the same, but the atmosphere was completely different. Gone was the confident energy of a woman who'd successfully escaped an unhappy marriage. In its place was the nervous tension of someone whose carefully constructed new life was crumbling around her. Emma sat on the couch, her phone nowhere in sight. She'd posted a video earlier that day, a tearful apology to her followers explaining that she was taking a break from social media to focus on family healing. The comments had been brutal, her former supporters turning on her with the same vicious enthusiasm they'd once directed at me. Where's Brad? I asked, settling into the armchair I'd bought 10 years ago. Gone, Sarah said simply. He left town yesterday after the state investigators froze all the business accounts. Turns out he'd been stealing from client escrow funds for months. How much? Nearly $200,000, enough to destroy the agency and probably send me to prison as an accessory. Sarah sat down across from me, and I could see the exhaustion in her face. The perfect makeup and styled hair couldn't hide the fact that she'd been crying, probably for days. My lawyer says I might be able to avoid criminal charges if I cooperate with the investigation, but my real estate license is gone. 20 years of building my career, and it's over. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Whatever Sarah had done to me, she didn't deserve to be destroyed by a con artist. Are you? Really? I'm sorry that you trusted the wrong person. I'm sorry that you're going to lose your business. I'm even sorry that you're probably going to face financial ruin. But I'm not sorry that your affair imploded, and I'm not sorry that your plan to destroy me backfired. Emma spoke up from the couch. Dad, we know we messed up. We know we hurt you and said terrible things, and we want to make it right. How? Sarah leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've been thinking about this for weeks, ever since I realized what Brad really was. I kept asking myself how I could have been so wrong about everything. About him, about you, about what I really wanted. And what did you conclude? That I was an idiot. That I threw away 18 years of marriage for a fantasy that was never real. That I let my ego and my ambition blind me to what actually mattered. She was crying, now tears streaming down her face as she spoke. Jack, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for another chance, not just for me, but for Emma, for our family. I looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger at what she'd put me through. Satisfaction at seeing her plans collapse. Sadness for the years we'd lost to resentment and miscommunication. And underneath it all, a small flicker of the love that had brought us together in the first place. Sarah, you didn't just have an affair. You turned our marriage into a public spectacle. You let our daughter broadcast my humiliation to the world. You painted me as an abuser and tried to destroy my reputation in this town. Even if I could forgive the cheating, how do I get past all that? I don't know, she admitted. I just know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to try. Emma stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. Dad, I posted a new video today. I told everyone the truth about what really happened, about how I twisted things to make you look bad. I know it doesn't undo the damage, but it's a start. I pulled out my phone and found Emma's latest TikTok. The view count was already in the hundreds of thousands, but the tone was completely different from her previous content. I need to tell you guys something important, Emma said to her camera, her face streaked with tears. I lied. Not about everything, but about a lot of things. My dad isn't abusive or controlling. He's actually a really good man who worked his ass off to provide for our family while my mom and I took him for granted. The video went on for 10 minutes, a point-by-point refutation of her previous claims. She explained about Brad's financial crimes, about Sarah's affair, about the way they'd manipulated the narrative to make me look like the villain. The comments were already pouring in. Some supportive, others angry at being deceived, most just confused by the sudden reversal. It's a start, I agreed, handing the phone back. But Emma, you had nearly 1 million views on those videos, calling me an abuser. This apology has 50,000. The lie always travels faster than the truth. So what do we do? Sarah asked. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd lived for most of my adult life. Mrs. Patterson was still watering her flowers, probably hoping to overhear some drama from the Morrison house. The mailman was taking his time with the evening delivery. The pizza place on the corner was getting ready for the dinner rush. This was my life, or at least it had been. These people, these streets, these routines that had defined my existence for 2 decades. Sarah and Emma had tried to take it all away from me, to cast me out as a dangerous pariah who couldn't be trusted around decent people. But they'd failed. I was still here, still standing, still capable of building something new from the wreckage of what came before. I don't know if we do anything, I said finally. Sarah, you made your choice when you decided to cheat on me. Emma, You made yours when you decided to destroy my reputation for internet fame. Those choices have consequences, and forgiveness doesn't erase them. But we could try, Sarah said desperately. We could go to counseling, work on rebuilding trust. No, I said, turning back to face them. We couldn't, because this isn't a marriage problem or a communication issue. This is about character, about the kind of people you chose to be when you thought you could get away with it. I walked toward the door, then paused, and looked back at my family, my former family. I hope you both learned something from this. I hope Brad's betrayal taught you something about the difference between love and manipulation. I hope losing your followers taught you something about the difference between popularity and respect. But those are lessons you'll have to learn on your own. Jack, please, Sarah called after me. Don't leave like this. I stopped at the door and turned back one last time. Sarah, 18 years ago, you married a contractor who loved you more than his own life. You could have had that man forever, but you decided he wasn't good enough for you. You wanted someone richer, more successful, more impressive to your friends. Well, you got what you wanted. How did that work out for you? I left them sitting in the living room of the house I'd helped build, surrounded by the ruins of the life they'd tried to destroy. As I drove back to my cabin, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The war was over, and I'd won. Not through elaborate revenge schemes or public humiliation, but simply by refusing to be destroyed. I'd survived their worst efforts, built something new from nothing, and emerged stronger than before. Sarah and Emma would have to live with the consequences of their choices. Brad would face criminal charges and probably prison time. The internet would move on to the next viral drama, leaving my family's dysfunction in the digital dust. But I would endure. I always had. 3 months later, I was putting the finishing touches on the cabin's new deck when Sarah's BMW pulled up the gravel driveway. I'd been expecting this visit, though I'd thought it would come sooner. She got out of the car wearing a simple black dress and carrying an envelope. Her hair was shorter now, less styled, and she'd lost weight. The confident real estate broker who'd once dominated every room she entered had been replaced by someone more humble, more uncertain. Hello, Jack. Sarah, you look good. It was a lie, but a kind one. She looked tired and older, marked by the stress of the past few months. The state investigation had cleared her of criminal charges, but her career in real estate was over. She'd taken a job as a receptionist at a dental office, a significant step down from the success she'd once enjoyed. The cabin looks amazing, she said, looking around at the improvements I'd made. You always were good with your hands. It's coming along. What can I do for you? She held out the envelope. Divorce papers. Final decree. It's all settled. I took the papers and glanced through them. Sarah had agreed to a 50-50 split of assets, despite the fact that her affair had caused the breakdown of the marriage. She'd also agreed to joint custody of Emma, though our daughter was spending most of her time with me these days. Thank you, I said. This makes it official. Jack, I need to tell you something. About Brad, about everything that happened. I gestured to the deck chairs I'd built from reclaimed wood. Have a seat. Sarah sat down carefully, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome. I found out why Brad targeted me. It wasn't random. He'd been researching successful women in the area looking for marks. He knew about our marriage problems before I did. How? Emma's social media. She'd been posting about our fights for months before the affair started. Brad saw an opportunity and made his move. He played me perfectly. Told me everything I wanted to hear about deserving better, about my husband holding me back. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the thermos I kept on the deck. That must have been hard to learn. It destroyed me, she admitted. Realizing that everything I felt, every justification I made for what I did, was manufactured by someone who saw me as a meal ticket. I wasn't some liberated woman taking control of her life. I was just another mark in a con game. And Emma. She's struggling. Lost most of her followers after the apology video, and the ones who stayed are mostly there to watch her suffer. She's talking about deleting all her accounts and starting over somewhere else. I sipped my coffee and watched a hawk circling over the pond. Might not be a bad idea. Sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? It was the question I'd been dreading, the one I'd been asking myself every night as I lay in my narrow cabin bed, listening to the sounds of the forest around me. I don't know, I said honestly. I've forgiven the affair. That was about you and your choices, not about me. But the rest of it, the public humiliation, turning Emma against me, trying to destroy my reputation, that's harder. I know. And I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything. No, it doesn't. But it's a start. Sarah stood up and walked to the edge of the deck, looking out over the water. I keep thinking about that summer when Emma was 8, when you taught her to fish right out there. She was so proud of that bass she caught, and you were so patient with her, even when she got frustrated and wanted to quit. She was a good kid then. She still is, underneath all the social media nonsense. She misses you, Jack. She misses the father who believed in her before she learned to perform for strangers on the internet. I joined Sarah at the railing, and for a moment we stood together in comfortable silence, watching the ducks glide across the calm water. I've been thinking about selling the house, she said eventually. Too many memories, and I can't afford the mortgage on a receptionist's salary anyway. Where would you go? I don't know. Maybe somewhere no one knows about the scandal, where Emma and I can start fresh. She's talking about finishing high school online and maybe going to community college. Says she wants to study environmental science. Help clean up places like this pond. That's good. She always was smart when she wasn't trying to be famous. Sarah turned to face me, and I could see the tears starting to form in her eyes. Jack, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider letting us stay? Not in the house, but maybe we could rent a place nearby? Emma wants to rebuild her relationship with you, and I want to try to make amends for what I did. I studied my soon-to-be ex-wife's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas, but all I saw was genuine remorse and a desperate hope for redemption. Sarah, we're not getting back together. That ship has sailed, burned, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. I know. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for a chance to be better, to be the person I should have been all along. I finished my coffee and set the cup down on the deck railing. There's a rental cottage about a mile down the lake road, old Mrs. Henderson's place. She's been trying to find tenants for months. Sarah's face lit up with hope. Really? It's not much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, needs work, but it's furnished and the rent's reasonable. Jack, don't thank me yet. This isn't forgiveness, and it's not a second chance. It's just practical. Emma needs stability, and she's more likely to get it here than running away to some new town where you don't know anyone. Sarah nodded, wiping away tears. I understand. And Jack, for what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've built here. This place, this new life. It suits you. After she left, I sat on my deck as the sun set over Miller's Pond, thinking about second chances and the difference between forgiveness and wisdom. Sarah and Emma had made their choices, and those choices had consequences that would follow them for years to come. But maybe that was enough. Maybe consequences were their own form of justice, and maybe redemption was something you earned through actions, not words. I picked up the divorce papers and read through them one more time, then signed my name on the final page. 18 years of marriage, officially ended with the scratch of a pen. It should have felt more momentous, more final. Instead, it just felt like completion, the last step in a long journey from who I used to be to who I was becoming. The ducks were settling in for the night, tucking their heads under their wings as darkness fell over the pond. Tomorrow they'd wake up and start again, searching for food, caring for their young, living the simple, honest lives that nature intended. Maybe that was enough for all of us.